Hey guys, it's Reverend Sean over at the Center Path, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the more esoteric ideas and how to make them more pragmatic and practical. Alright, so today we're going to talk about past lives and rebirth. Okay, so when you read the Buddhist text, it talks about the Buddha actually seeing his past lives in detail, understanding his past lives and his past karma, which brought him to where he was at the time. And in the classical sense, the traditional sense, they're thinking, oh, once he was born 100 years ago as a farmer, and then later as a butcher, and later as a statesman, and later eventually as a prince, where he became disenchanted with life and saw the suffering of this and that, and then became the Buddha. But or even looking further back, oh, at one time he was a goat who had been slaughtered, or whatever it was. So there's a literal interpretation of that. However, what I think is really the practice of that is to not take it as the literal truth, because I don't think any of that stuff is supposed to be taken literally as true. If it was, we would have a lot more discussion about that. But what I think it does is to develop empathy, to develop compassion and wisdom, mainly empathy first, is to understand how other beings live. And to really understand how other beings lived. And one of the common things we see, especially in like healthcare, where I work, is that people will say, well, you don't understand, you've never been through it, which makes no sense whatsoever. Because if you have empathy and compassion, then you do understand that there is suffering. Because suffering, you boil it all the way down. The suffering is basic. Now, there's many different kinds of suffering, and then you add other stuff onto it. Imagine if anybody who went to a burn center, would say, oh, I don't want to have anybody treat me unless they've been burned. That doesn't make any sense, because you're going to miss out on a lot of people who have a lot of good skills and a lot of good compassion, a lot of good empathy, and a lot of wisdom who can help you. And the idea of understanding other lives, and it doesn't take much. It takes a little bit of insight meditation. You spend time getting to where you're kind of still. Right? That's the first part of meditation anyway. Focus on the breath, become still, become calm, become observant, and then see, and then really understand, and then develop a wisdom about it. An insight, right? That's kind of the path that we want to try to take. Now, so if you're doing that, and you say, what's it like to live as an ant? Okay? Does that literally mean that you had to have been an ant? No, you can watch them, you can observe them, you can gain a lot of information. You see them scurrying about, you see the kind of things that they have to deal with on a daily basis, and you can imagine, even just imagine, what these other creatures, a mouse, has to worry about being eaten, has to find food, has to find shelter, has to do these things, has to live as a mouse. We have the ability to even project that for ourselves. That would be more of the idea of past lives. Kind of in a nutshell. When we're looking at a past life, we're also looking at the last moment. You're not the same person you were when you started this video, because your mind is thought. And this gets us into the self. The body is not the self. The mind is not the self. The consciousness is not the self. The mental formations are not the self. The perceptions are not the self. So there's these things that are not the self. Not that there is no self, but that's not the stable self. Okay? Now, obviously, you combine all those things at this moment, that's you. Okay? I combine all those things at this moment, that's me. That's my experience in the universe, of the universe, with the universe. Okay? The entire thing. And that's where we're trying to get when we get deeper into our meditations, deeper into our thought processes, deeper into our contemplations, deeper into our wisdom. And the process of seeing yourself moment by moment as changing, which is a very common topic in Buddhism, right? We're talking about everything is impermanent, everything has change, and that's for darn sure. I mean, just take out observation, there's nothing that's permanent. Even impermanence is not permanent. It's just everything changes. And that's something that as we get a hold of, we learn to have less attachment to that which is, like that unhealthy attachment, and we have less detachment because we want to enjoy what is. It's just this somewhere, like we say, a centered path, a middle path between nihilism and hedonism, right? Or between having everything and having nothing. There's some kind of middle area, and that's the way to be, and that's kind of our process in thinking. So when we're talking about past lives, we're talking about moment by moment. What were you a few moments ago? How are you reacting? Now, if you use, like up here, right, like this thing right there, that's the wheel of Samsara. Okay, that's it's a Tibetan mandala tapestry. This is called the tanka. Okay, and they're hand-painted little, very ornate paintings which explain a story. Now, they have these pictures of demons and deities and all this kind of stuff. If you take that literally, you're going to miss out. Okay, don't take it literally. Don't freak out about it. They're not going to come visit you in a dream. If they do, it's a message. It's like, what can you make up of it, right? And using the basics of Buddhism, we can slowly get into and understand these things better and differently. When we're seeing this tanka here, we see the different realms of existence. Now, does that mean that there is actually some people, celestial beings, flying around up there? No. What we're talking about there is like, what is your existence in the best and best of times? You know, having a lot of money and nice cars and big house and all this kind of stuff, that's obviously impermanent. Now, as we go further around the wheel, we see that there's hell realms, there's animal realms, there's the hungry ghosts, there's pretas, right? And people, we can see, and there's human realm, of course, right? And the conflict realm. So we see that we can be in each of those, and that's the process. It's not that those things actually exist. Don't worry about that. What you want to do is understand the concept that those things exist in us. You know, we exist in those kind of ideas. There's a time when you're in a hell realm. There's a time when you're in a heavenly realm. There's a time when you're like in the human realm, the most opportunity. There's time when you're in a conflict realm. There's time when you literally are in an animal realm. You're acting like an animal. You're reacting like an animal. And it's to understand the way those things work in our own experience as well. So, rebirth, re-existence, and karma are all wrapped into this kind of thing. Now, seeing back past lives moment by moment. Look back at where you were a year ago. Notice how much better you are. If you're not better, that's karmic change. That's you've done things, you've made choices that caused you to be where you are. You have to take a lot of responsibility. Now, there's bad stuff that happens to good people, all kinds of stuff, and we try to figure out why it happened. And one of the things, I was in Vietnam, and I was at a little temple in Hanoi, and they have these posters, and it depicts like people who are acting bad at one time, and then they come back in the next life, and they're born as a dog or something like that, or born as a fish or whatever. I mean, it says something like that, or they have these like, or ghosts chase them and stuff like that. Those are metaphorical, allegory, similes, those kind of things to teach you hopefully how to be. And remember, we're trying to teach not these educated people like you. You're more educated. You have the ability, not in the human realm, because we're educated. We can read anything. We can look anything up on the interwebs, and we can find that information anywhere. So we can have a better, broader explanation of what goes on in life. And these were originally made. Those little posters were made for the most uneducated and fearful people there are. You know, not to say that the people who are studying them are fearful and uneducated. No way. But it's designed for that. It's designed to be acceptable for even the smallest child. And that's what a lot of these things are for. It's to explain it to them. And as you become more sophisticated in your knowledge and your wisdom and your ability to discern and your ability to understand, then you start to let go of those things. You know, think of, for example, when you were a kid and there was a thunderstorm and you were afraid. People would say, oh, it's because God is bowling or dancing or whatever. Now go back even further and they're going to say, well, that's Thor. He's the God who takes care of us. And I say, well, how do you know? I says, well, what he's doing is he's fighting the ice giants. Not to cap on Norse religions. I love Norse religions. I think they're really amazing and they have a lot to offer as well. But it was a way to explain to people what was going on that they didn't understand at the time. big thunderstorm scares a lot of people. You say, well, it's because there's a God fighting some things and keeping them away from us, and that's why we have to be good. We have to be thankful to this God. That makes sense. It is very simple sense. And later on, the story became more and more complex. Whether there was a person like Thor, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. But it's the same kind of idea, which I can find that because of my heritage does come from those areas, like Finland and whatnot. But and so that was kind of a little bit closer to me. But there's a lot of stories in Chinese and Japanese and mythology of India and stuff like that where they explain the same kind of things. So if you're taking them very, very too, I don't want to say seriously, but too literally, then you may be missing out. But don't totally toss them away, and don't ignore them when you see that. Don't be so pompous that you're like, oh, that's just nonsense and ancient crap. Don't be that way, because you will be able to receive some information from that for yourself. Look back at those things. Look back at those stories. And also it gives a richness, and it really gives a very interesting idea of how our minds work as humans. They're very humanistic. So let's go ahead and do that. That's kind of my take on past lives, really. I mean, if you're looking more pragmatically, secularly on that, that's an easier way to view it. There's really not enough evidence to say that we were reborn. Obviously, my material that is my body, the atoms, the molecules, and stuff like that have been around forever, and they will be around forever. Nothing is created nor destroyed. We know that from physics. And it just changes form, right? So at one time, I was also worm poop that eventually became nutrients for a vegetable, which was eaten by my father's father or mother's mother, and eventually that became a part of them, and the calcium was in their bones, and that calcium was eventually released in some way for the creation of the sperm cells and the egg cells and yada yada yada, and here I am, that same stuff, the same air that I've breathed, the Buddha has breathed, it's literally, I mean, that same air is around. It hasn't changed. It didn't disappear. It didn't go somewhere. It didn't get absorbed and gone. We understand that from physics, and that's how we can understand how we're recycled, basically, into new life. Okay? And it's like in the Tibetan sense, they see that even like worms and bugs and spiders were once our parents, or we were once their parents, so we're related. And that's that interrelatedness that is so beautiful and helps you build compassion. So this is Reverend Sean over at the Center Path. Tell me about your past lives. I mean, we can look into them. Tell me what you think about that kind of thing. And have a wonderful day, and take care of yourselves, and do your studies and do your meditations, because they really work and they do help your mind and your soul, right? We'll talk about that later. You take care.